The acacia tree stood skeletal against a copper sky, its branches twisted like arthritic fingers, grasping at clouds that would never come. Beneath its dying shade, Kayla pressed her palm against the cracked earth, feeling the pulse of a world slowly strangling itself. The ground that had once yielded sweet tubers and fresh water now offered only dust and the bitter taste of desperation. Her clan of 18 Australopithecus afarensis had called this stretch of East African savanna home for 3 generations, but home was becoming a tomb. The drought had stolen everything familiar. Rivers that once sang with life now whispered through beds of sun-bleached stones. The great herds that had painted the horizon with their thundering migrations were ghosts now, following ancient paths toward distant promises of grass and water. Only their tracks remained, deep gouges in hardpan clay that told stories of exodus and survival. Kayla's weathered fingers traced the outline of a massive elephant footprint, still fresh enough that morning dew had pooled in its center like a tear. Her people had survived by reading such signs for millennia, understanding the language of hooves and paws better than any written word. This track spoke of westward movement, of creatures following instincts older than consciousness itself toward salvation that might not exist. Behind her, the clan stirred with the restless energy of animals sensing change. Brack, the eldest male, squatted on his haunches beside the remains of last night's fire, his deep-set eyes studying the horizon with the intensity of a predator. At 43, he carried the scars of countless seasons, a twisted left arm from a hyena encounter, parallel claw marks across his shoulder from a leopard that had learned to respect his strength. His authority came not from size, but from an uncanny ability to read the rhythms of survival that governed their world. The younger males clustered around him like iron filings drawn to a magnet. Jomo, barely past adolescence, but already showing the broad chest and powerful shoulders that marked him as future leadership material, picked at the thorns embedded in his feet from yesterday's desperate search for water. His eyes held the dangerous gleam of someone ready to prove himself, regardless of cost. Beside him, Nuru methodically sharpened a digging stick with the edge of a quartzite scraper, each stroke deliberate and purposeful. These males understood that leadership meant making choices others couldn't stomach. The females formed their own constellation of concern and calculation. Amara, heavy with her second pregnancy, rested against a termite mound, while her toddler Tau explored the patterns that beetles carved in the dust. Her swollen belly represented both hope and burden, new life demanding resources that might not exist. Nearby, old Zuri worked her toothless gums around the last strips of dried antelope meat, her clouded eyes seeing futures that younger minds couldn't imagine. She had survived 4 previous droughts, each one teaching lessons written in hunger and loss. The morning air carried no relief, only the scent of dying grass and the distant musk of predators growing bold with desperation. A fish-eagle circled high overhead, its cry echoing across emptiness, where once it would have announced the location of fish-rich waters. Now it searched as frantically as any land-bound creature, wings catching thermals that rose from earth too hot to touch with bare skin. Carla stood slowly, her joints protesting with the sharp reminder that even at 26, survival extracted its price from every bone and muscle. She had been born during the last great drought, her earliest memories shaped by the taste of bitter roots and the constant anxiety of adults who spoke in whispers about difficult choices. Those whispers had taught her that survival sometimes meant abandoning everything familiar, following paths that led into uncertainty because certainty meant death. The clan's children sensed the tension without understanding its source. Little Asha, barely 4 years old, sat braiding dry grass with the focused intensity that marked her species' remarkable tool-making instincts. Her small fingers worked with precision that would have amazed observers from the distant future, creating cordage that could bind spear points or secure gathered foods. Even in play, her people prepared for survival. Brack rose with the fluid motion of someone conserving energy for battles yet to come. His scarred hands gestured toward the horizon where heat shimmer created false lakes of silver water. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone who had led his people through impossible choices before. The grunts and gestures that comprised their communication might have seemed primitive to future observers, but they carried nuanced meanings developed over millions of years of cooperative survival. His message was simple but devastating. The seasonal water holes that had sustained them for generations showed no signs of returning life. The underground springs that had provided backup during previous dry spells had failed completely. The game trails that normally brought fresh meat within hunting range had shifted far beyond their territorial boundaries. They faced a choice that would define not just their immediate survival, but the genetic legacy they would pass to future generations. Jomo's response came swift and certain, his young voice carrying the confidence of someone who had never faced starvation. He pointed toward the elephant tracks, then mimicked the flowing motion of migration with his powerful arms. His argument was compelling in its simplicity. Follow the herds, trust in the ancient wisdom that had guided countless species through countless crises. The great animals possessed instincts honed by millions of years of evolution. If anyone could find water and grass, it would be them. But Zuri's weathered voice cut through his enthusiasm like obsidian through hide. She pointed toward the scattered bones of antelope that had died during their own migration attempts, their skeletons bleached white by sun and picked clean by scavengers. Migration meant abandoning territorial knowledge accumulated over generations, trading familiar dangers for unknown ones. It meant trusting their children's lives to paths that might lead nowhere. The debate that followed would have seemed alien to modern observers, conducted in a language of gestures, grunts, and postures that conveyed complex emotions and strategic thinking. These were not the primitive ape-men that popular imagination might conjure, but sophisticated beings whose survival strategies had been tested by millions of years of African climate change. Their brains, while smaller than their distant descendants, operated with the razor-sharp focus of creatures who understood that every decision carried life or death consequences. Amara's perspective carried special weight because her pregnancy made her both vulnerable and valuable. Her unborn child represented the clan's genetic future, but also a liability in any dangerous journey. She pressed her hands against her swollen belly, feeling the strong kicks of life, demanding to be born into a world that might have no place for it. Her words came slowly, each one measured against the weight of responsibility she carried. The morning sun climbed higher, transforming their gathering spot into a furnace that tested their ability to think clearly under pressure. Sweat evaporated almost instantly in the dry air, leaving behind salt crystals that stung their eyes and cracked their lips. This was environment as adversary, nature stripped of any pretense of benevolence. The Africa of 3.6 million years ago offered beauty and abundance to those strong enough to claim it, but showed no mercy to the weak or indecisive. Kala found herself studying the faces around her, reading the micro-expressions that revealed each individual's true feelings beneath their public positions. Fear lived in the rapid blinking of eyes, in the unconscious touching of throats where thirst made itself known. Determination showed itself in the set of shoulders, the firm grip of hands on tools and weapons. These physical tells had kept their species alive through countless crises, allowing group decisions to emerge from the complex interplay of individual survival instincts. The sound of distant thunder rolled across the savanna, causing every head to turn toward the western horizon with desperate hope. But the sky remained mercilessly clear, the sound revealing itself as the rumbling passage of a distant herd, perhaps the very animals whose tracks they had been studying. The cruel irony was not lost on them. Water fell somewhere beyond their reach, while they debated whether to abandon everything in pursuit of it. Nuru's practical nature asserted itself as he began calculating the logistics of either choice. Staying meant maximizing their knowledge of local resources while minimizing energy expenditure. But it also meant accepting that those resources were failing. Moving meant accessing new possibilities while facing unknown dangers and the constant energy drain of travel. His methodical mind worked through scenarios like an ancient computer, processing survival algorithms. The clan's youngest adult female, Dalila, had remained silent throughout the debate, but her eyes held the fierce intelligence that marked her as someone whose opinions mattered despite her age. When she finally spoke, her words carried the weight of someone who had been thinking beyond immediate survival toward longer-term consequences. Her gesture toward the southern hills suggested a third option that others had not yet considered, a path that might lead to higher ground where seasonal rains gathered in permanent pools. The temperature peaked as the sun reached its zenith, forcing them to seek the minimal shade offered by a cluster of fever trees whose yellow bark seemed to glow with internal fire. The heat was not just uncomfortable, but genuinely dangerous, capable of killing through dehydration in a matter of hours. Their bodies had adapted to this environment through millions of years of evolution, but adaptation had limits that climate change could exceed without warning. Brack's scarred hands moved in the complex patterns that indicated serious consideration of multiple options. His leadership style balanced individual autonomy with group consensus, understanding that decisions imposed by force rarely survived the test of genuine crisis. The survival of their small band depended not just on choosing the right path, but on choosing it in a way that maintained the social bonds essential for cooperative hunting and defense. The afternoon brought no relief, only the gradual realization that their debate was consuming precious daylight and energy. Every hour spent in discussion was an hour that could have been used for travel, food gathering, or water searching. The luxury of extended deliberation was itself a resource they could not afford to waste indefinitely. Amara's contractions began as subtle tightenings that she tried to hide from the others, but Zuri's experienced eyes missed nothing. The old woman's expression shifted from concern to alarm as she recognized the signs of premature labor brought on by stress and dehydration. This changed everything. The clan could not move a woman in active labor, but staying might doom both mother and child to death from thirst. The crisis crystallized their choice in ways that abstract debate could not. Jomo's migration advocates suddenly faced the reality that their proposed journey might begin with abandoning a pregnant female and her unborn offspring. Zuri's stay-put faction confronted the possibility of watching helplessly as both mother and child died for lack of water. The comfortable middle ground of extended discussion evaporated like morning dew under the pitiless sun. Carla's decision came not from rational calculation, but from something deeper, an intuitive understanding of what her people could and could not survive. Her gesture toward the elephant tracks carried the authority of someone who had earned the right to choose for others through years of successful leadership. They would follow the herds, but not blindly. They would move in stages, always maintaining the option to return if the path proved impossible. The preparations began immediately, each clan member understanding their role in the complex choreography of group migration. Tools were secured, water containers filled with the last precious liquid from their failing sources, and food supplies redistributed for maximum efficiency. The children sensed the gravity of the moment without fully understanding it, their natural adaptability already beginning to process the reality of leaving the only home they had ever known. Brack's acceptance of Carla's decision came with the grace of someone who understood that leadership meant knowing when to step back as much as when to step forward. His scarred hands moved in the ancient patterns that signified respect and support, binding the clan together for the trials ahead. The social bonds that had sustained them through previous crises would be tested by this journey, but they were stronger for being freely chosen rather than imposed. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of copper and gold that matched the dying savanna around them, the clan of Australopithecus afarensis took their first steps toward an uncertain future. Behind them lay the bones of their ancestors and the familiar dangers of home. Ahead stretched the unknown path that might lead to salvation or destruction, but definitely led away from the slow death of staying still. The elephant tracks led westward into the gathering dusk, each massive footprint a promise that somewhere ahead lay the resources necessary for survival. Whether that promise would be kept remained to be seen, but the act of following it represented something profound in the story of human evolution. The willingness to choose uncertainty over certain death, to trust in the ancient wisdom of migration that had carried life across continents and through ice ages. Their journey had begun not with fanfare or ceremony, but with the simple act of putting one foot in front of the other, following the tracks of giants into a future that would be written in dust and determination, sweat and hope, and the endless human capacity for survival against impossible odds.